Hi, I'm Kathy Moore.
And I'm Tom Moore,
Welcome to our family podcast.
which is Our Celestial Road. I have some personal events that occurred that I want to share that have had an impact on my life, but also I want to clarify a lot of facts that are not correct that were presented by the media and continue to be perpetuated even 39, 40 years later. I want to talk about these three stories. One of them is, it's referred to as the Salamander Letter. Essentially, Steve Christensen, who was one of my business associates, and frankly, one of the smartest people I've ever known. I'm convinced he had a photographic memory. He was a very sober individual, but one of those deep thinkers that could certainly smile with the best of them, but he didn't like to be the center of attention either. But he loved to research historic documents, particularly those related to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He had an office space that was filled with file cabinets, the rare books, rare documents, and he was approached in about 1984 to potentially purchase this document called the Salamander Letter. There's a guy named Mark Hofmann who later has been proven to be one of the biggest and most successful forgers in the history of of mankind, not just the United States. But he had this document because he was determined to destroy the church. Even as a young missionary, he had his eyes on figuring out ways to destroy the church. I don't think there are very many truly evil people in the world, but he is one of them. And his intent, again, with this Salamander Letter and many other documents that were later discovered to be fraudulent, he gave this letter to several historic people who love to gather historic documents, and most of them weren't interested. But the essence of the Salamander Letter is that the story of Joseph Smith having the angel Moroni appear to him and show him the plates related to the Book of Mormon. He came up with this document that was from Martin Harris that was to another member of the church, suggesting that instead of Moroni, it was a white salamander that appeared, a lizard, basically, salamander. And he, instead of Moroni, the salamander demanded that Joseph's brother, Alvin, who was at this time deceased, appear before that the plates could be given to him, that the white salamander who appeared would have to have the right to let Joseph Smith do this. Well, needless to say, it was pretty bizarre. But at least one collector looked at it and authenticated the fact that the ink was of that period of time. Well, later on, more sophisticated work was done that showed that that's not the case. But the reason that Steve ended up buying this document from this Mark Hofmann was not to buy it and then hide it, but buy it, authenticate it, and then he was going to donate it to the church. Well, Mark Hofmann, there were rumors going around that the church was trying to find documents and then bury them, and later proved to be the source of that was Mark Hofmann himself. This guy was a devious guy. So Steve purchased the document, started trying to authenticate it, and one of the guys that was helping him, and I won't mention his name. He became an apostate himself, and he ended up, instead of helping Steve along the way, he was fearful that Steve would, in fact, hide it. So he anonymously contacted Time magazine, which was a big deal at the time, and told him about the essence of this document and exposed the fact that Steve owned it, that he intended to hide the document, which is totally fictitious. Anyway, the end result was that worldwide there were news reports about this document that supposedly just dispelled much of the critical parts of the early stages of the church, including especially the Book of Mormon, which we really believe is a critical part of verifying the fact that Joseph Smith truly was a prophet. Anyway, when this news came out, it really did throw shockwaves throughout the world. There were thousands of people who left the church, a lot of mocking going on. But what happened before that, which is really interesting, I knew that Steve had purchased this document. And I was working late one night at the office. Steve was there as well. And there was a guy that came in, and again, I'm not going to mention his name. I've written about it. But he came into the office, and I just remember looking at him and thinking, there's something really dark about that guy. And so later on, I said, who was that came into the office? And Steve told me that it was, this guy, that he was helping him authenticate this letter. They were doing research. And I said, I got to tell you, I just don't like the fact that this guy's coming into our offices. I don't like the feeling I get. And that's not me normally. But Steve said, I get it. And they decided to do some of the research outside of the office, which may have been what led to this individual deciding to go to Time magazine. He thought that there was something going on there. But anyway, so that's one story. But it ties in later. I want to talk about another thing. All of these stories overlap and intertwine, but to have context of the ultimate story, which is about the bombings that happened as a result of this same Hofmann killing two of my friends and trying to kill somebody else, actually, but that was thwarted because the bomb went off in his hands. But the point is that at the time, CFS Financial was going through some difficult times. The company had started. Gary Sheets started the company. I was hired early on as a sales rep. Ended up moving through the ranks of the company as the sales manager, then an executive vice president, then became the president and the vice chairman of the board. And during those years, what we did was we syndicated real estate, meaning that we would go buy big real estate projects, 200 to 500 unit apartment complexes, typically, although we did other kinds of real estate, but that was the core of the business. We would buy those projects, and they were highly leveraged, meaning that there was debt on it, but the intent was to take the properties that typically were in a little bit of trouble, turn them around, make them profitable, and then later on sell them for a profit in 5 to 7 years, roughly. And we were very successful. We had a great track record, but in the early 80s, around 84, about the same time as the Salamander Letter came out, interest rates just skyrocketed. First mortgage rates, for instance, on residential properties was 19 to 21%. I mean, it was just off the charts, ridiculous. Well, we had a lot of properties, including the CFS building in downtown Salt Lake, which was a huge project that we were changing from the Arbex department store to office space, and the Boston building, several other buildings in Salt Lake, in addition to the other properties that we had. The interest rates were just made it extremely difficult to do our business. Well, that was one problem. The other problem that occurred is that we were under the jurisdiction of the Securities and Exchange Commission. We were a broker dealership, meaning that we had to be licensed and registered. We had to have annual financial statements so that we met certain requirements of the Securities and Exchange Commission. We had to have a net worth that was commensurate with the amount of money we were raising from investors. And we had investors, in a lot of states, I don't know, 30 plus states that had invested in these projects, but we had to be licensed to do that by the Securities and Exchange Commission. Well, one year, the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, determined that some of the assets that we had, they were changing the way that we could report those assets. Even though there was equity in them, we definitely had assets that had value. They decided that going forward, we wouldn't be able to utilize the full amount of those assets, and we'd have to amortize it over a period of years. There were new rules that came in. So in 1 year, we went from being able to raise millions of dollars from investors to the SEC coming in, to us adapting the new rules. And instead of a positive net worth, we suddenly had a negative net worth. That doesn't mean that the assets weren't there. It's just the way they wanted us to account for them. Well, that meant we didn't have the ability to continue to syndicate. So between the interest rates and these new rules, we were just stopped in our tracks. Well, we got to the point where, there were initially 5 of us who were the officers, and I was a principal owner. Steve had some interest in it, in CFS, and Gary was the controlling shareholder of the company. Stan Benfeld was another one. So we had Gary Sheets, me, Steve Christensen, Stan Benfeld, and Richard James. At some point, Richard James departed from the company, and at that point, there were the 4 of us, and we were running the business, and we brought in some other players that were employees. What happened was that we sat down and said, "Look, this is serious. We now, with this new audit, we're going to have a real problem unless we bring in additional assets with some investors." And so Stan had some contacts around the country, and he started talking about it because we had a unique concept. We're a financial planning firm that did more than just the investment side of it. We did financial planning for high-income individuals, and we had a whole group inside the company that would put together financial plans based on the information that we would gather from a customer. And we'd go back and help them implement those plans over a period of time. And it was fairly unique at that point. This is before the College for Financial Planning. It was fairly unique. So, but instead of bringing in investors, Gary said, "I don't want to do that. I want to figure out a way to work ourselves out of this." Well, Stan and Steve and I didn't agree. And we decided to part ways, kind of go do our own things. Gary stayed behind to continue to try to save the company without bringing in exterior investors. And what happened is Steve got an office in the Judge Building in downtown Salt Lake. I went to Alpine, built an office building down there, and continued to do my financial planning practice from Alpine. Stan went off and actually got hired to run another pretty good sized company somewhere else. And Gary continued. So I give you that background because of the next piece of the story, which is, and I want to begin it on October, actually the 8th of 1985. I had to get my brain working. So October 8th, 1985, Steve called me, Steve Christensen, and asked me to come and meet with him at his office at the Judge Building. We met. He talked about a project he was looking at doing. There was a building downtown Salt Lake that he wanted to take. It was a hotel. He wanted to convert it to condominiums. Wanted to know if I had an interest in raising money, taking a little bit of an equity position, and of course, making money off of bringing in the investors. I listened. I thought it was intriguing. And so we had an initial meeting, and we decided that we'd meet again on October 15th, which was a week later, to talk in more detail about what that was. Well, October 15th, I got a phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning. And, I was a bishop at the time, and I thought, when I get those kind of phone calls, usually it's somebody died or there's something horrible that's happened. And so that was my expectation. But Steve answered the phone, or Steve was on the other end. And we'd planned to meet that morning at 7 a.m. So it's 3 a.m. now, and we planned to meet at 7. He said, I can't make the meeting. He said, Pinnock and I, Hugh Pinnock, who was a general authority at the church at the time, he said, we've been out all night trying to find somebody. Well, I had a little precursor to that with Steve in our meeting on the 8th, where we talked about kind of what was going on in our lives. We didn't like the fact that CFS was still struggling. I had invested in a lot of the real estate projects that Steve was, or that Gary Sheets was still trying to save, and so we have investors that were involved, and we're trying to protect them. And interestingly, there was no bad blood between Gary or Steve or Stan or me. We just all had a different opinion and decided that it was probably best for Gary to run with what he was doing, but we just couldn't buy into it. So that morning of the 8th of October, in our Steve and my initial meeting, we talked about some stuff that was going on in his life. He said, "Man, I've uncovered some things that are just going to look really ugly. It's going to, I can't get into detail about it, but it's got something to do with the documents and of course, we knew the history of the Salamander Letter, which was a year before, and all the negativity around that. But I really didn't know, other than Steve was weighed down by what was going on. So again, fast forward a week, and Steve calls me at 3 o'clock in the morning to cancel the meeting. And that's a pretty significant thing to me. And I'll share that reason why in a second. But so I went, I got up later, went to the office, and it's 8 o'clock in the morning or something. And I'm at my office in Alpine. I get a phone call from one of my former secretaries, Vicki Dusnip. And Vicki said, "Have you heard the news?" I said, "No, I don't know what you're talking about." She said, "A bomb went off and killed Steve Christensen." And I was in shock. I said, "Thanks for calling." I didn't, and I just thought, I don't know what to do. It's got to have something to do with these documents, because, Steve had told me about it the week before. But I hung up the phone, called my wife, Kathy, told her that I was going to drive to Salt Lake. I was just dumbfounded by what had happened. So I did that. I drove to Salt Lake. I still had the ability to park at the old CFS building, so I parked there, and I walked up, and as I got to a certain part right outside of the office where CFS was still officing, Gary Sheets came out, and we looked at each other, and we gave each other a big hug, and I said, Gary, this has got to have something to do with what Steve was telling me about, something to do with documents, and that's the extent of our conversation. And Gary actually was being chaperoned by a police officer and the FBI, because they wanted to find out what Gary knew and so forth. So from there, I went over to the judge building, and I was standing outside the judge building, and they had it roped off. There was the police tape that was around it, but the whole street was roped off, or taped off, I should say. And there were a lot of people in that crowd, and buzz going on, and I could hear some knuckleheads saying things. And he said, "Yeah, one of the news organizations said this has something to do with the mafia. That Gary Sheets and Steve Christensen did business in Las Vegas." Well, that's true. They worked with doctors and dentists in Las Vegas, but the amount of disinformation that was already being spread. There was an article in the Desert News that said something similar. That this was on the 18th, 3 days later, that they really did think it was something tied to the mafia and organized crime, and not knowing at all what they were talking about. So I'm listening to this, and I thought, you got to be kidding me. So I was there probably 20 minutes or so, again, just taking in what was going on. The cop cars all over the place, and we literally were in the middle of the street with this crowd. And then I saw another former secretary of mine, Jean Tripp, walked up to me, and she said, "Have you heard the news?" And I thought, are you mental? Yeah. Why do you think I'm standing here? Why do you think this crowd's here? And she could just tell I was questioning why she would ask me the question. She said, No. Have you heard that a bomb went off at Gary Sheets' house? At that moment, and I'd heard the crowd saying, it must have something to do with CFS. At that moment, I just panicked. And I just said, I got to get home immediately. So again, I didn't even know that the second bomb that had gone off had actually killed Gary's wife, Kathy Sheets. But I started running, and I saw 3 cops standing there, and they were talking, and I walked up to one of them. I said, "My name's Tom Moore." I started to tell him I wanted some help. And then the cop put his hand up, and he said, "Stop." He said, "Wait, Tom Moore?" He said, "Yes." And he shows me this list. It's got the names of Gary Sheets, Tom Moore, Stan Benfell, Richard James, and Steve Christensen. We were at one point the partners in CFS. He said, "Don't worry about anything. We've already dispensed the bomb squad to your house, and there's a helicopter that's going down." And and at the time there were no cell phones. There was no way for me to contact Kathy. And all I knew is I left her home with our little family, and we had her sister Diane was staying with us with a few of her children. So it was, there was just panic. And instead of me taking off, this cop said, "I need to have you come with me." So I ended up being taken to the Salt Lake Police headquarters. They interviewed me. They asked me a lot of questions. I told them what I knew. And as I was coming out of the office where I was being interviewed, Stan Benfell came out. He was being interviewed at the same time. We saw each other and embraced and just wept. And, by this time, I knew that Kathy Sheets had also been murdered, and as did Stan. And Stan had been very close with Gary for many years. Stan's wife was great friends with Kathy Sheets, and but at that point, we weren't sure what the next step was going to be. And, they let me go. And I went, I thought, I don't know what to do. I don't want to go home, because I knew by then that Kathy was out of the house, that the bomb squads were there. There's nothing I could do there. And I wanted to just see if there's anything else I needed to do while I was up there. So I decided at that point to drive back down to the judge building. By this time, the crowd had dissipated. They'd actually taken the tape down, and this was in the afternoon. I'd been at the police department for quite a while, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to just walk in like I know what I'm doing and see what's going on. So I walked in without anybody challenging me, which shocks me to this day. So I touched the elevator button, went up to the floor where Steve's office was, and I just saw this horrible scene. Now, they'd taken Steve's body by now, but they'd taken markers and put them on the walls up and down this hallway, where bomb fragments, pieces of clothing, all kinds of stuff was there. And I just looked up and around, and I didn't know what to do. I just couldn't believe what had happened. And I did decide at this point that I wanted to see how Gary was doing. And so I rode down the elevator after having done that. But before I tell that story about my interaction with Gary, so I want to kind of do a little sidebar about one of the experiences that was very critical to this, and that is that when I met with Steve on October 8th, which was our initial meeting, when I arrived at his office, there was a package in front of his door. Now, again, this was a week before the bomb went off, but I picked up the package. He was late, so I picked up the package and waited for him to show up. And when he arrived, I told him I was going to charge him a delivery fee. We laughed and went on our way, had our meeting. Well, then a week later, Steve called me at 3:00 in the morning to cancel the meeting. Had he forgotten to cancel that meeting, I have great concern that I would have shown up, picked up the package, and done a repeat of the week before. And the package, the way it was assembled by Hofmann, he put a mercury switch in it, so that when the bomb tipped, it would connect the explosive device and detonate. And instead of it happening to me, that's what happened to Steve. There was another secretary that worked for an office a couple of doors down. She saw it when she came in, and she knew Steve, and she thought maybe she'd pick it up. And he said, "Oh, I better not do that." And thankfully, she didn't as well. But I've been eternally grateful that Steve didn't forget to cancel that meeting. And that said, I'm sad that he showed up with a bomb, and that was detonated by a mercury switch. Now, I want to go back to the kind of the next steps in the process where I was going to see Gary. So I was now at the judge building. I had gone up to see the devastation that had taken place with the bomb. I came down. There was a policeman there, and he asked me then. Nobody asked me going up, but he asked me then, "Who are you?" And I told him my name, and he said, "You're one of Gary's friends, right?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "I hope you can help us. Gary needs to go back to his house and get some clothes and whatever, because he can't stay at the house. It's a crime scene, and I think it would be helpful if he went there with one of his friends." Well, I was certainly a friend. Gary was a mentor. I loved him dearly, but he had a lot closer friends. There was an age disparity, but I thought, yes, I'm happy to help. So the policeman said, "Would you meet me at the Sheets home at whatever time it was?" I don't remember. It was in the late afternoon. And I said, yes. So I drove to the home, and when I got there, nobody was there. And where Gary's house was in the Cottonwood area, and he had this beautiful home that you kind of drove down this driveway, and at the bottom of that, they built this beautiful home. There was a garage that was on one side. You come out of the garage, walk over a bridge to go into the main house, and they're beautiful grounds and so forth. So when I got there, I drove down and nobody was there. There were no police. They'd already cleared out. However, there were still those markers on the side of the house where bomb fragments had hit. And so I just drove to the bottom of this area where their garage was. And again, I'm by myself, and I just thought, I can't believe what's happened here. And I waited. But one of the kind of sacred moments in my life was Gary. There's a car that finally came down. It was a police car. Gary's in it. By the way, they're thinking he is potentially the murderer. So he's a suspect, in the murder of his wife and Steve Christensen. And so, he had a little bit of a short leash from the policeman, but Gary was going to go be with his children and needed to get clothes and overnight, whatever, shaving gear, etc. So he got there and we embraced again. And, first time we embraced, it was after Steve had been killed. This time it's after Steve and his wife had been killed. It's the first time he'd been to his house. And I just can't imagine what was going through his mind. We walked up past the garage where the bomb was, where Kathy had been killed. They had, they'd outlined where her body was. And I'm just thinking, I can't imagine what's going through his mind. We walk across the bridge over the stream to the main house, open the door, and it was just silent. I don't want to say dead silent, but it was. It was just quiet completely. And the policeman said, why don't you go down and get your clothes and encouraged me to go with Steve or with Gary. So we walked down this long hallway in this extremely quiet home, and get into his room, and we just both sat on the bed. And I remember thinking, he's never going to be in this room again with his wife. He had no idea of that when he left early this morning. Kathy had no idea of that when she went out for a walk and returned, and she's the one that saw the bomb. It could have easily been Gary, but where it was positioned was not where Gary would have just pulled his car out and left, which he did. Kathy didn't see it till she went on a walk and came back. But here we are in their bedroom. And, I got really emotional and just said, Gary, I can't imagine what's going through your mind. I didn't know what to say. And which it was very interesting because he was very humbled. He was overwhelmed. There's no question. But he was serving as a bishop himself at the time. And he said, Tom, look, I don't really understand what's gone on. But I know that the Savior provided an opportunity for us to live forever together. We're sealed in the temple. I love her. She loved me. We're gonna be able to be together again. And then he started to comfort me, to Barry's testimony about the atonement, about the Savior, about the great work that the Savior provided for us and allowed us to be together as families. So, I think you learn a lot about somebody when you're in an extremely difficult situation. And instead of, raising his fist and shaking his fist at God or trying to find out who done it, any of that kind of stuff, he's bearing his testimony about the reality of eternal life and marriage and families. It was a very sacred experience, and I'm the only one in the world that had that. So anyway, as we were sitting there, the policeman walked up and said, "Mr. Sheets, I need you to hurry a little bit," because he hadn't even started to gather his stuff yet. So, I had some thoughts in my mind about what to say to that police officer, but I kept those to myself. And so Gary gathered his stuff. We walked up to the cars, embraced again, and went on our way. And what's amazing to me from that moment, the speculation that happened with Gary. Gary was a wonderful man. He had a great sense of humor. He loved people. The good he did in the world, people didn't have any idea about, and I saw a lot of it. And we were going through some difficult business things, but there was no fraud. There was no intention of doing anything wrong. It's just it was the times in which you're living, and certainly we would have, hindsight is great about whether you would buy a property or not, whatever. But he was really a good man, and it irritates me when I hear, because I started hearing that he was having an affair with his secretary, as an example. She was a wonderful, extremely talented woman. And Gary gave her a job when nobody else would. She could type faster than anybody I've ever seen in my life. And Gary gave her a job when nobody else would. And she was really good. And they speculated that Kathy and Gary were having problems. And, I can tell you that they were a normal couple. I'm sure they had fights along the way, but there was nothing going on. But all the speculation was, they were going to divorce, and it's just a bunch of nonsense. And then, the mafia pieces, all of that stuff that started to be thrown around by the media. I lost total credibility with the media. And I could go on and on about the different things that they put out there that proved to be inaccurate, lies. Just, it's just wrong, whatever happened. So anyway, from that moment, I kind of went on my way with my life. Gary had to put his life back together. Shortly thereafter, there's an FBI agent who decided to make a name for himself, started doing some things to prove that Gary was doing bad things. And Gary ended up being indicted on 64 counts of fraud. Later on, after all, thousands of dollars of legal expenses and everything else, he was found not guilty on all 64 counts. I was there when the judge rebuked the FBI for the work that they'd done on it. I was there, and several other instances. But the thing I wanted to really make sure was clear was that Gary was not a crook. He was somebody that did a lot of good in the world. Now, I want to kind of tell a couple of other things, because what happened when the second bomb went off, I finally went back home. And when I got there were police there. Kathy was back at the house, and they encouraged us to go stay somewhere else. There was a wonderful soul in our ward named Ralph Garrett, and Ralph came up to the house and said, Bishop, here's the keys to my motorhome. Here's my credit card. And I want you to just take off and use my credit card so that nobody could trace you. Well, we still didn't know what was going on. By this time, all the speculation was it was something to do with CFS. And that was Hofmann's intent, was to divert everybody. So we packed up our children, got in this motorhome, had no idea where we're going, kind of drove around for a while, and ended up driving to Idaho. We got to Idaho, checked into a hotel, and because I wanted to be somewhere where I could see what was going on in the news. And the second day, on the 16th, we're in this hotel room, and the news came on and said another bomb has gone off in Salt Lake. And I went, oh no, who? I'm just thinking, I have no idea who that could be or what, And then they showed the pictures that it was a guy named Mark Hofmann who had accidentally had the bomb go off in his hands. And now they're speculating, finally, that this had nothing to do with CFS. Well, that took a while, frankly, before that happened. But this bomb went off in his hands. And at that point, I said, Kathy, let's pack up. I know what this is about. And so we packed up and headed back home. And on the way, I decided that, because I was pretty clear what this was all about. And they were still speculating. They didn't know the connection between Hofmann and Steve and so forth. But I wanted to make sure somebody knew that. So I contacted the police and tried to let them know what was going on. And, again, it started to become fairly clear at that point that Hofmann had blown himself up. What Hofmann never admitted to was what he was going to do with that third bomb. He didn't intend to blow himself up. The car, he was in his car. He'd driven up to very close to the church headquarters and right across the street from the McCune mansion, where one of Gary Sheets' best friends, Dean Larson, who was an attorney, officed. And when the bomb went off, this attorney was great friends with Stan. He was great friends with the Sheets family. I knew him well because we were involved in some investments together as well. And when he looked out the window, he saw that the clothes had been blown off of Hofmann, that he had garments. So he ran down there, and by this point, some other people had gathered, and Dean Larson, somebody had come up with an IV bag they'd call 911 and they'd shown up. And at this point, somebody gave Hofmann a blessing to live. Dean Larson, who's, again, this great friend, is there holding this bag with a drip bag for Hofmann. And again, Hofmann never admitted what that third bomb was for. Initially he said he was trying to kill himself, because the truth is, Steve knew he was a con man now, and that's why he and Hugh Pinnock were looking for him. But the result was that Hofmann claimed that he was trying to kill himself. Then he claimed that he was going to take it down to meet with another documents dealer, that Hofmann and another documents dealer named Ashcroft met every Wednesday or whatever the day was. And so he said he was going to go deliver the bomb to Ashcroft. And I thought, that's so stupid. He's a long ways away. He's going to walk with a bomb with a mercury trigger, a mile away. He's going to walk into the mall, put it down, walk away, and and wait for it to blow up. I mean, it's just a stupid assertion. My assumption, and this is just my own belief, but by the time after the bombs went off, I went up to see Steve's widow, Terry, and I wanted to give her my condolences, and I asked her if she knew anything about this Hofmann thing. She said, "Oh, I know a lot." She said, the night before the bombs, Steve was on the phone with Hofmann, and he basically said, what Steve caught him in was trying to provide some fraudulent documents called the McClellan papers. Never existed, but Hofmann was trying to get a lot of money for these documents. He had this house of cards falling apart, and Hugh Pinnock had arranged a loan for somebody to buy the McClellan documents. McClellan was an apostate, former apostle, and Hofmann came up again with another scheme to come up with some documents that were to do something to destroy the church again. And the result was that Steve really found out that the documents didn't exist. He'd done more homework. He knew now that he was a con man. So he's on the phone with Steve is on the phone with Hofmann, and Terry overheard the conversation. And Steve said, "Look, Mark, this is really simple. You either give us back the $180,000 that we paid to buy the McClellan documents, or you give us the documents. It's really that simple." And Hofmann kept coming up with all kinds of excuses, and Steve kept repeating that he said, "Look, we're going to file charges against you. I'm confident you're a con man." And so, this is what Terry told me. And just realizing that, and later on understanding that the documents really they never did exist. But you start wondering about, so if Mark Hofmann now knows that Steve Christensen and Hugh Pinnock know that he's a con man, who do you need to kill? Well, I need to kill Steve because he's gonna out me, and I'm going to try to do a diversion. So I'll just plant a bomb down at Gary Sheets' house so that people will think that it's got something to do with CFS. But I really do wonder why he was parked across the street from the church headquarters. I don't know if he planned to go in and set a bomb inside of the parking lot. I can't believe he would be stupid enough to take it up for Elder Pinnock. But I don't know. I mean, nobody really knows what he was doing, except that maybe he was trying to get in his last lick to destroy the church, and figured if he sets a bomb off at the church, that would do something. But this guy was just a bad guy, to say the least. But what's pretty clear to me is wherever he was going, he'd parked his car, he went to get the bomb, he was going to go deliver it somewhere, and it went off in his hands. And that was the end of the story. And I shouldn't say the end of the story, but that certainly stopped the speculation about whether it was the mafia or something else. So those are things that I wanted to share, to make sure that people understand that we'll know someday, when we get on the other side, what the third bomb was intended for. And I'm sure it wasn't anything that was a brilliant scheme by Hofmann. He'd been caught, and later on, obviously, he confessed. It was a debacle of magnitude with the way that it was investigated, the way he was. He came to the confession. It everybody was trying to make a name for themselves in Salt Lake City, whether it's the police or the attorneys. It just ended up being a fiasco that, frankly, was an embarrassment to the city of Salt Lake at that point in time. That's my own opinion. So that's what I wanted to share.